Who would like to introduce themselves?
I'll go. Mhm.
What's up, Jay?
Hello? Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah, very
Yeah,
clear.
yeah.
Okay, cool. My name's Jay Dubois, and I'm going to be starting my own network state. I
Nice.
prefer to do a school concept, so a network school, not the network school, but a network school, because I think that campuses are like the ideal form for a small new city, and that schools are like the perfect structure for organizing a group of people that have a collective mission and that are actually interested in productivity and discussion. And the one that I'm starting is called Nukanga. And I'm going to be interviewing some other folks who are starting new startup societies as well, just to see all the different ideas out there and how it's going and what people are figuring out along the way. And then I guess the final thing is that Nukanga, the goal is to help other education-based startup societies with an emphasis on gamification and growth technology, especially in high growth regions in the global south.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's a great mission over there.
Thanks.
I can go next. Pratham, and I'm 22. I recently graduated from a university, and right after that, like I was in crypto space for like last 3, 4 years, working with multiple startups. That's how I knew biology was starting this network school. So after my university, I immediately went away there, was there for the last couple of months. So now I'm shifting there for like next 1 year. But along the way, I'm also building my startup. It's in my name called Deepwork AI. So it's an AI automation tool. It's in Copilot to actually help you create automations. But then I was really interested in the concept of network states and like Suzalu. So I was very quickly sold. So I was like, yeah, this is something I want to join. And here I am.
It's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go next. Very brief introduction. I'm Salman. I'm from Bangalore, India. I work in Web3 at POAP actually. And what else? Yeah, I was at network school last month. Really a great time. And generally, I took a course from Balaji like a very long time ago, startup engineering, because of which I was always following him. And ever since he wrote the network state, I listened to all his podcasts. Just interested in the concept and just following along here to learn. I like what you all are doing with this as like a team as well. Just here to absorb and learn. Thank you.
And thank you, sir. And again, Solvent is the amazing creator of all these amazing network school POAP NFTs. You'll have a statue in the future for the
Nice.
king of the NFTs.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just mention a note on that. So the every time like last month at network school, like I did a web collection, which is the idea behind that is to like document everything that's happening at network school, like be able to relive moment in time. Similarly, I've done that at whatever other events I've been to as well.
I can go next. I'm Chance. I'm from Canada originally. I'm on currently on sabbatical somewhat, but most recently I did a research project on pop-up cities. So I did something like 150 interviews across 8 or 9 of them. That was the last year and a half. And I'm currently prepping for a residency called Citizenship Protocol Residency at Ed City, Patagonia next month.
Nice. And just a note, Chance is like the OG of the OGs. And Chance is the guy who started the original 729 Discord. Like before folks migrated to Balaji's TNS Discord. Like Chance was the original founder of the Discord that basically started a lot of this 1729 TNS network state movement of everything. Is the like the OG in a lot of cases. And
Nice
Chance,
to have you here.
you were also involved in Plumia as well, with a lot of these great Plumia initiatives with Lauren as well.
Yeah, I've been around, we'll say, in this space.
Really. Chance is
It's
the
been
OG.
Guess I can jump in here. I'm Joshua, originally from Amsterdam, longtime US international nomad, about 10 years in Central America, in the jungles there. We actually were building Loci. I'm the founder of Loci, and that's the Latin word for places. So we were working on the network state concept before I found Balaji. We're about a year and a half into kind of designing a concept for how we could have decentralized real estate holdings. And then ran across his interview, 7 hours long, listened to it back to back on a around the country road trip, and said, "Oh, there they are." That was an opening to see that people were doing this around the world, and been to network state conferences, had beautiful times hanging out with Jim, great conversations, great networks, and we just keep building and keep moving forward. And I'm both active, obviously, in Loki, specifically developing that, but also really involved in pushing a bunch of digital and physical communities that are building in the space and related ones as well. So one of my main focuses is actually connecting decentralized and regenerative movements together to create real solutions. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, a lot of respect for what Josh is doing with Loki, and it's also like very physical. A lot of the network state stuff is digital on the internet, but there's also like a physical connection, land-based connection, and that's where Loki steps in as well.
We're the land protocol for everybody else's beautiful digital communities.
Hey, Ryan, welcome.
Hello, hi guys.
This is I think you're dining from network school because I see the hotel, the distinct hotel curtain over there at the back.
Yes, I'm in my room. Yes. The hotel is great, but yeah. So I'm like new to this concept. Like I don't have any experience with other societies. So yeah, I'm new to the game.
Awesome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm originally from India. Moved to network school this month. Professionally, I'm in AI. Almost 5 years in AI, building SaaS products using AI. And like in terms of my interest, like I've been following the Bitcoin space very closely, and I'm interested in like how crypto, Bitcoin, that kind of stuff can obviously help startup societies, and also what nation states have already done with their constitutions and how we can import that to startup societies. Yeah, basically, startup societies will need some constitutions, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I'm interested in how people are thinking about that.
Nice, nice. Nice. And Ryan, you're one of the, I remember you were one of the go-to guys for the whole, like, there was like this Bitcoin hack on APM thing. And I think you and Christians were trying to like basically ask questions and consult on that as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Kamal is saying that, sorry, no camera and mic. I'm Kamal, a digital marketing consultant from Turkey. Welcome. I've been following Balaji's work and NS. I'm interested in the new state concepts. I can't wait to listen to you all. Thank you. Thank you, Kamal. Welcome.
Awesome. Do we have other individuals that we maybe missed? DT, did you
DT.
introduce yourself? Pratam, yeah.
Hi everybody, this is DT from Malaysia, active around Bitcoin community around the region, and we've been to a network school, the conferences, and then going to the conference next month. I'm here to learn for everybody. Actually, I learned about network school through one of the committee around here, Bitcoin Harbor, just half an hour away from the network school. So that's a lot of things going around. Excited to learn everything from you guys.
Awesome. Welcome.
Anyone else? Jim, maybe you?
Sure. Hi, my name is Jim. I was a part of the 1729. I was a part of the original Discord that Chance set up many years ago before we migrated to TNS. And Menachem was also in the TNS with us as well. This is the group that Balaji had used to beta test his book, The Network State, before it was published. So we had these weekly lectures on this interesting, super cool virtual reality bubblehead system where Balaji would lecture and we would give him feedback and for him to kind of balance ideas and ask questions. And that's how many of us from there got started with the network state. And obviously there was just the network state conference and network school, a lot of other initiatives. Chance mentioned there was Plumia, a bunch of other events as well. Hey Mati, welcome. So also super excited to be with everyone here to learn, to discuss. And Edeneum is Salon is a forum kind of, it's almost like an experiment to connect folks who are on site at the network school, as well as network school members who are online, as well as innovators, startups, folks like Jay, who's like starting his own network society, network state, who are interested in folks from various startup communities, societies, founders like Josh, organizers like Chance, and technologists like Pratham and Ryan, everyone, to get connected and discuss and really find out the connections between the ancients and the present and the future and all of that. And without further ado, I can hand it to Menachem, who is the founder of Edeneum. Edeneum is Menachem's kind of brainchild. He's been doing this actually for quite a while. And it's really a lot of interesting concepts, and we're hoping to test things out and really expand on a lot of these things.
Thank you so much, Jim. Yeah, I think for a quick introduction, before we actually go into the discussion itself, we'll just go ahead and introduce you what Edeneum is all about. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So it actually began with Balaji's books, right? Of course, the virtual lectures with 1729 when COVID was starting. So one of the things that Balaji was saying, if a startup begins by identifying an economic problem in today's market and presenting a technologically informed solution to that problem in the form of a new company, a startup society, a network state, begins by identifying a moral issue in today's culture and presenting a historically informed solution to that issue in the form of a new society. Okay, so that's basically the premise, the principle that we're going to be focusing on with Edeneum. So actually, Jim and I, Matt Operator, others within TNS, we actually started with the history of the Peloponnesian War. So what I've done, I actually took from this professor from Harvard, actually, his name is Harvey Mansfield. Okay, so he basically sits at the board of Harvard for the past 50 years. He's like a very impressive professor, huge on Machiavelli. Like he was part of that group with Leo Strauss and all that stuff. Anyway, so he had a very nice book called The Student's Guide to Political Philosophy, which he basically takes all of the great political philosophers for the past 2,000, 2,500 years and brings it into a short guide in terms of the books themselves and what we should get acquainted with. So I created this Notion page where, ranging from Thucydides to Plato and Aristotle, even Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, Rousseau, like you think of it, right? It's really a true comprehensive list of political philosophy. And we thought like it would be like a good foundation to focus the TNS folks, the network school folks, really anyone who's interested in network societies in general to get acquainted with this foundation, right? So this is how it began. And yeah, we've had reading circles, we've had salons like this one. This is our third one so far, but there's been a lot of improvement and versions of where this is going to go, right? So this is like the beginning of it all. Now, what's interesting as well, so there's also this really important work that everyone should be learning, in my opinion, and that's the work of Aristotle called the organon. So the organon is instrument, tool in Greek, in ancient Greek, and it's actually a tool for the mind, right? So it's everything in regards to the craft of logic, whether it's the categories or the art of rhetoric or the analytics, right? So everything in regards to logic, almost every single political philosopher or really anyone in the space would tell you in ancient history that we're not even able to go ahead and start reading Thucydides or Plato or whatnot if we didn't really read this, right? So the whole point of the categories of the Aristotle, it's essentially to hone our minds, right? How do we not make mistakes when it comes to our thoughts, right? And so this is something that I've been working on by myself, of course. Other people are interested as well. But the whole point is to really have a good, solid foundation in order to move forward with philosophy in general, right? So that's basically the idea. And we actually just finished designing and building the new website for Edeneum. So the newsletter for network states. right? So the whole point is really to offer classical wisdom, bridging it with the modern society with network states, or even a citizen, right? They don't need to be the ones actually creating the network state, but if they want to be achieving human perfection, intellectual virtues, whatever it may be, then this is like really an all-in-one resource for Edeneum. Yeah, that's a little bit of an introduction of what Edeneum is about. And I think like we could get started with today's presentation. I think this is one of Jim's favorite topics. So we're really excited to show you what the Edeneum number 3 brings about. So we're actually going to go and dive into some excerpts into Thucydides. So the history of the Peloponnesian War and how they relate to network states. Thucydides, this was written like hundreds of years before the Common Era. This is like really amazing how the principles, the things that he's saying are screaming at our generation. They're screaming at our society, how relevant they are today. So we're going to take a couple of excerpts and yeah, we'll use them as launching pads for discussion, maybe some thought-provoking conversation, and then we'll go from there. Before we go and get started, does anyone have any questions, any comments?
Yeah, I've got a quick question.
Sure, Jay, yes.
What does Edeneum mean? Is that like Garden of Eden?
It's related. It's related. I wrote a whole thing about it. One day I'll publish it. It's in a way of
it's not
like,
published?
Not yet. The
yeah. Explanation is not published yet?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It will be soon. Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's a cool name.
Thank you. It came from a higher source of inspiration. So thank you. Thanks, man. Anyone else? Any comments? Any questions? Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to do is, as I mentioned, we're going to take some excerpts we're actually going to be talking about chapter 1. And this is the state of Greece from the earliest times to the commencement of the Peloponnesian War. So like understanding the real causes behind everything. So it'll take maybe 5 minutes for each part for me to read, and then we'll begin the discussions. And of course, part of the reason why you guys are here is we're so excited to hear your thoughts, your ideas, how they relate to network states, and let's get started. Okay, so Thucydides, an Athenian, wrote the history of the war between the Peloponnesians and the Athenians, beginning at the moment that it broke out and believing that it would be a great war and more worthy of relation than any had preceded it. This belief was not without its grounds. The preparations of both the combatants were in every department in the last state of perfection, and he could see the rest of the Hellenic race taking sides in the quarrel, those who delayed doing so at once having it in contemplation. Indeed, this was the greatest movement yet known in history, not only of the Hellenes, but of a large part of the barbarian world. I had almost said of mankind. For though the events of remote antiquity, and even those that more immediately preceded the war, could not from lapse of time be clearly ascertained, yet the evidences which an inquiry carried as far back as practical leads me to trust, all point to the conclusion that there was nothing on a great scale either in war or in other matters. Okay, so this was like an introduction, and now Thucydides actually starts writing it. For instance, it is evident that the country now called Hellas had in ancient times no settled population. On the contrary, migrations were of frequent occurrence, the several tribes readily abandoning their homes under pressure of superior numbers. Without commerce, without freedom of communication, either by land or sea, cultivating no more of their territory than the exigencies of life required, destitute of capital, never planting their land, for they could not tell when an invader might not come and take it all away. And when he did come, they had no walls to stop them. Thinking that the necessities of daily sustenance could be supplied at once as well as another, they cared little for shifting their habitation, and consequently neither built large cities nor attained to any form of greatness. The richest soils were always most subject to this change of masters, such as the district now called Thessaly, Boeotia, most of the Peloponnese, Arcadia excepted, and the most fertile parts of the rest of Hellas. The goodness of the land favored the aggrandizement of particular individuals, and thus created faction, which proved a fertile source of ruin. It also invited invasion. Accordingly, Attica, from the poverty of its soil, enjoying from a very remote period freedom from faction, never changed its inhabitants. And here is in no inconsiderable exemplification of my assertion that the migrations were the cause of there being no corresponding growth in other parts. The most powerful victims of war or faction from the rest of Hellas took refuge with the Athenians as a safe retreat, and at an early period became naturalized, swelled the already large population of the city to such a height that Attica became at last too small to hold them, and they had to send out colonies to Ionia. Okay, so this was the first excerpt that we wanted to share, and we could talk about the issues part one, but maybe going back to here, what do you see here that Thucydides is writing that he's telling us that we see in today's society?
Thanks, Professor Menachem. One parallel, arguably, is that if you look at the ancient Hellas, Greece, you got a bunch of city-states, right? From Attica to the Peloponnesian Peninsula. It's like a parallel to, in a way, to some extent, to the nation-state system, where I think nowadays you got 190 to 200 nation-states, and in the ancient Greek world, you got potentially up to hundreds of these small city-states. But then amongst these small city-states, you got the larger superpowers, right, of the time. The Athens in Attica, and then Sparta in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. And you see this kind of power struggle between the superpowers vying for influence amongst a league and a collection of much smaller, separate, and very multifarious city-states in that case. And there are arguably geopolitically, there are these parallels between the Peloponnesian era and the modern era.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone else want to share maybe how these things that are talked about here are applied today, or maybe there's a pattern that we see today?
Yeah, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but what I find interesting here is maybe disdain is too harsh, but definitely a critique of groups who are traveling and living nomadic lives using very little resources, and something that almost is like a negative impression of that, cultivating no more of their territory than the exigencies of life required, destitute of capital, but also apparently living in balance and being able to move freely and having an integrated experience with the land. And it looks like this is one of those key points in history where we started to have this kind of nomadic life, and then you started to have the sedentary city life starting to emerge. And so this kind of brings to my mind a lot of the conflict between civilization, the growth and the kind of coagulation that occurs in civilization as it grows, and then maybe an abandonment of a concept of living in harmony with nature as well. So a lot of my interest is how do we actually blend those two? You don't have to give up a minimalistic life as a nomad to go full civilized. So there's some tension here between how civilization was evolving from that kind of nomadic, a little bit more in tune with nature life, and then going into these metropolises and cities and groups that formed and then started conflicting because you're running out of resources. Right now you're struggling for resources. First the land favored aggrandizement, and then the individuals start fighting over the land. Interesting tension point that kind of emerges from that.
Thanks, Joshua.
I guess I'll add on what Joshua was saying, the need for harmonizing with nature, I think, is a popular point now where people are looking at their lifestyles and realizing that not only are we potentially harming ourselves by ignoring our connection to our environment, but that being able to live in cities that are very green is actually important for our psychological well-being. And it definitely seems like there's a strong bias against the nomadic lifestyle and instability in general. So it seems like there's a bent towards farming, or at least having strong, stable source of basic resources, and that it's important to make sure that those basic resources are distributed amongst every member of the population and not subject to any type of invasion or theft.
Thanks, Jay. Anyone else? Maybe I could bring some discussion points here in terms of the geopolitical stance today of migration. There's so many individuals, especially in Europe. Right now in Europe, it's pretty interesting what's going on. You have two factions, people who are very pro and people who are anti migrations to certain countries. So this is like something that is currently happening right now. The frequency is astronomical. America was built on that as well. And they were also sending colonies before it became America, right? With the Mayflower and everything like that, they escaped the king. So this is like already like a huge challenge that we see in the formation of these new countries or maybe these new states. Migration is something that is clearly important. In terms of the commerce, the freedom of communication, we see this, for example, in the amendments, right? In the Constitution of the United States, right? The freedom of, specifically the freedom of communication. Here, Thucydides is saying either by land or sea, but right now we have media channels. It's really unlimited, right? And how free is our communication, right? So, in terms of the ancient past and today, what is the differences? What are the differences? What is the similarities that we see here? If anyone wants to crack at that.
Yeah, I've got one here. I think there's a conflation of nomadic lifestyle and migration. Migration is a very linear thing traditionally, and so it's addressed very linearly, right? In the U.S., migration is everybody coming to the U.S. In other countries, it's people going from one country to another. So it's all very linear and it's sequential in a lot of ways, and it's just one place to another, which gives it a very static perspective, right? You're only thinking about the place they left and the place that they arrived. But the actual experience of nomadic life, much like the people that were living in ancient times here that were destitute of capital and never planting their land, is not about, is much far less of a linear progression and more about a lifestyle. We've come up with the philosophy at our core that we call lifestyle liquidity. And so the concept is liquidity and how you flow through the world. And so it's not about this, I'm here and now I'm going there. It's about how are you able to move freely and live freely and go to different places and then go to another place, right? It's the freedom of exit as well as the freedom to go somewhere. And so that's something that I think needs to be focused on, is like, how are people living with a sense of freedom to move around, and how do we separate that from the really the negative kind of construct that comes from a lot of talks about migration generally.
Nice.
Yeah, just Josh, to build on what you're saying, interesting points. I think with the US, there's also a big diaspora of Americans abroad around the world. I think that the US diaspora is about 8 million people, 8 to 9 million. A long time ago, I wrote an article tangentially about this, that with the US diaspora is actually pretty big, amongst one of the biggest diasporas, especially in Latin America, in places like Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, etc. But and then you also have, as you said, you have folks who are coming in. And I think drawing a parallel to the Asian world with Hellas, with Attica, I think that with Greece, you have this boundary, right, between the mercantile world that was centered upon Athens and the nomadic world. If you go north of Attica to north of Thessalonica, then there are the Asian, like the Pontic peoples and the Asian nomadic folks, right? In present day Bulgaria, Albania, etc. So they actually had like a nomadic versus sedentary versus mercantile. Was it sea merchant civilizations slash ways of life? So those three were in fluid motion, and the nomads coming from the north, putting pressure down to Attica, and then you have the farmers the sedentary producers, right, in places like Attica, in Greece proper. And then you have the Athenian colonies all the way to the Black Sea, for example, to Sicily, present-day Sicily, to present-day Africa, competing versus the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were the forefathers of the Carthaginians, and the Athenians were able to carve out a sea mercantile empire in the Adriatic Sea as well as the Eastern Mediterranean Sea as well. So the confluence of the nomadic, the sedentary agrarian, as well as the sea mercantile systems. And you can argue that there are parallels to these three systems also in the present day world as well.
Just to add to that, a couple months ago, I read a book on the history of trade, and it talked about what Jim was talking about there, the kind of colonies of Greece and even into, as he mentioned, into the Black Sea. And mentioned that the Greece area, like they actually couldn't sustain the populations they had. It was a very precipitous situation they had there. And they really depended on, like we do now, on like really complex trade relations and just trade for basic sustenance. Because they can grow a lot of oils and wines and that sort of thing. But it's funny they had to go to the place that is currently being attacked as the breadbasket in Europe to get sustenance there. So I think there's parallels there around the volatility that exists for larger settled places. A funny thing too here I mentioned where maybe it seems a little shooing people who are migrating a lot here, more nomadic. It's funny, maybe 1,000 years after this period, you had the rise of Islam, which were nomads basically, and that was their strategy. That's what their strength was. They viewed settled cities as like really weak and easy pickings, essentially. And even within internally their own world, they joked amongst themselves like, ah, yes, we take over cities or places, and then we become like fat and lazy city people. And I think someone said there, Kamal, I think said from Turkey, humorously, the Ottoman Empire, hundreds of years after it had settled and lost its nomadic aspect, still would play up the symbols of almost like we are still nomadic because they viewed that as superior to settled people. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chance. The Gok Turks, right, from present-day Mongolia, there's this migration from the Western Gokturk Khanates it was in the 7th to 8th centuries AD, and then the slow migration through Central Asia, through the plains of Central Asia, all the way to present-day Asia Minor and even beyond that. There's this huge migration through history of nomadic groups from the east and all the way westwards. The Gokturks, the Avars, the Bulgars, the Huns, even you can argue the Slavs were also part of that earlier migration that through the Great Plains of present-day southern Russia, Kazakhstan, all the stans, and all the way west.
Yeah. And I think we're in this paradigm of settled. That's the paradigm we're in. I think we take it for granted as well that communication, we're all in different places around the world, in thing that for people here would just be like absolute black magic. So there was a lot of traveling as well, as far as giving information and that sort of thing. It's interesting.
Yeah. Seems like if we were to make a comparison between this ancient world and the present day, that the commerce and communication in the present day is cranked up there, is really well developed. But there are some serious questions about territory and even capital. What kind of money are we going to have? Is it housing, planting your land, having your own crops, or at least a garden? And then where people are going to live and what kind of lifestyle they're going to have. There's some pretty big questions about that. That's most of what we discuss with TNS. But it's interesting just asking that question, what kind of lifestyle is actually better? Is it better to be settled? And then you have the bias against being too settled and then becoming lazy, or that idea. Or is it better to travel around and have to really exercise your lifestyle liquidity actively, not just as a reaction, but as a way of life, continually moving around? Because my only issue with the notion of the Gokturks and just Turks in general moving around, is that it seemed like their lifestyle was heavily dependent upon feeding off of what the settled cities had built up rather than building up their own thing. And if that was the case, then it would seem that having the settled city was actually better and more developed.
Just to build it, and from a historical perspective, the Gokturks were more of like a federation. So compared to the sedentary agrarian societies, if we look at, for example, the Eastern or the Western Gokturk Khanate, it was a federation of peoples. It was quite fluid actually, because the nomadic civilizations and the sedentary civilizations were essentially constructed at the core. The building blocks were the frameworks were very different. With the sedentary civilizations, you got many of them grew out of river valleys, right? The Indus Valley, the Nile Valley, and you were able to build sedentary cities surrounded by plots of land and plots of farms. I think Josh had mentioned a lot of the parts about land as well. Whereas the nomadic peoples, it was always like a fluid construct. So it would congregate around the biggest and strongest clans at the time. And the idea was, it was also resource dependent, but depending upon where are the most fertile grasslands at the time. And hence the notion of nomadic, right? Because every winter, every summer, every spring, the camps would be different. It's almost like Burning Man, but
changes with the seasons.
Changes, yeah, with the seasons, exactly. So with the Gokturks, or even with the Huns, and also with the Mongols later on, they would essentially rotate their herding spaces based on where are the most fertile lands. And the structures of the clans are very, how to say, very fluid. So for example, with the Gokturks were dominant, every clan, every tribe would potentially call themselves Gokturks. It was not at the time, arguably being a Gokturk was not a race, it was not a state, but more of a federation. The Huns were also in the same way, they were a federation of peoples. And then as the Gokturks migrated west, that clan, that federation also changed in its composition as well it's interesting, like throughout time. And if we map the Turkic peoples and the languages, for example, from Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan all the way westward to Turkey, it's almost like a fossil of the whole Gokturk migration of the whole process. And Kamal, you're from Turkey. I don't want to steal the microphone. Please go ahead, and if you have any insights on the whole like migrations and everything, please go ahead. But it's a fascinating history of how this whole thing started. It kind of started 1,300 years ago for centuries, and the compositions of peoples within the federation also changed as well. And it was in a very fluid kind of manner.
Kamal, would you like to respond?
I think he said he has no mic earlier.
Okay. Yeah, so one thing what's interesting, so are we saying that migrations is a feature and not a disadvantage? And especially with network states, and you talked about this, Joshua, with the liquidity aspect, is that with network states, you're almost incentivized to be traveling, right? You could have the networks, you could be part of a network state while you're in Japan, but also in the United States or wherever else, and geographically. But let's say, for example, there was an event, or maybe there was a ceremony, or maybe, I don't know, all the citizens wanted to do something else in some parts of the Nordics, or maybe in Africa. Then people would naturally travel and still be part of the same system and the network state. So it seems like the network state provides that as the solution, right? So like it's ingrained inside of the system itself.
There's definitely a connection between the nomadic tribes of the Asians compared to the network states. Biology had this idea of the freedom to choose where you want to go and to exit the whole network state system. So with the earlier point about the Gokturks, the Huns being federations, so you had these like clans that basically chose to join, let's say, the Gökturks or exit the Göktürk Federation. It's almost like the freedom to choose when and where to enter the federation and exit the federation. And that had a lot more fluidity compared to, let's say, if you were in a village somewhere in medieval France and you're tied up to one feudal lord and you couldn't go anywhere without the lord's permission.
So a federation is almost like a network, it sounds like.
Absolutely. It's like a network.
As long as these folks over here are members of the larger collective, then you can go over there because you're still part of the same larger federation and you can move around through that federation network.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's also interesting here is with network states, in reality, the relationship with all these different factors are actually inverse, right? So Jay, you mentioned that like commerce and communication is boosted up today. So today, and biology talks about this all the time, right? A network state founder, they would, before, if you were a founder of a country or whatever, like there were so many things that you had to take into consideration, so many factors. Now, all the risks are essentially removed. And all you have to do is build the community first, right? And once you have the community, then you could build the commerce. You obviously have communication channels. Today we see this with Discord, with X, all these things. And once you have this collective action, then you could go and manifest the physical. So I love when Balaji says this, that it's not land never, right? You start on the cloud, and you have all these factors that are completely removed. You start with your vision as a network state founder. And then once you're established, once you're the opposite of destitute of capital, you're wealthy of capital, or you've cultivated a community and you have amazing communication with your social community, and you have commerce and all these things, then you could go ahead and establish and actually invest and go down to the physical world and go like that. So in a lot of ways, the network state has a complete inverse relationship to these problems that Thucydides is talking about, right? It's really interesting. Also, something that Balaji talks about is how we don't want, if you would want to right now invest in a city or go into the physical world, you wouldn't want to have the richest soil, the most popular city, right? Like we know that it would be impossible right now to go to New York and create a network state and replace the whole system, right? But if, for example, you would take a Burning Man, or you would go someplace in Nevada or maybe somewhere in Southeast Asia or something that's not really populated, and you go from there, and you'd be able to actually build it. And you're not inviting invasion, and you're not going all these things. Maybe you guys could talk about that relationship with the creation of a network state and the easeability, with the removing of these factors, these risk factors, with what Thucydides is talking about.
I would throw in there that risk also actually indicates value. And so I'm leery of people who say there is no risk sometimes, or that we're eliminating risk, because there's risk that's inherently necessary. And I think one of the challenges I see often in the network state space and pretty much every other thing is the human element of people thinking that one way of lifestyle is better than the other, and that there is some way to measure this. To a couple points, the nomadism that existed, whether through the Gökturks or any other group, Muslims, I rarely have seen in history much of the invading relying on scarcity of resources. It's usually been to plunder wealth. It has rarely been because they needed to survive. It's usually been just that populations grow, they keep traveling, they find gold and silver, and they start raiding. It's rarely been like a survival thing where they were so hungry that they had to go raid some other city for their goods. Maybe, yeah, Jim, I see you having maybe
respectful opposition, but please go ahead and chime in afterwards.
It's not absolute. It's not absolute. What I'm trying to drive to is that the important thing, at least in this age, is to remember that land is pretty well claimed, resources are available, and so I think our focus in our current history is how do people want to live? And one of the biggest values that network state offers to me is a federation or a network of solutions that meet different people's needs, because my focus is to create places where people can experience their lifestyle liquidity. That doesn't mean that everybody wants to be liquid or that anybody wants to be liquid the entire time through their life. So the thing is like, how do we create solutions that meet a wide variety of people's lifestyle choices and how they evolve through their lifetime? And that fluidity is, how do you actually live between different places based on how you want to live or where you are. If you're older, maybe you don't want to move so much, fine. There's another network state that can support that. So a lot of that is
Right.
thinking about how people want to live and then finding the solutions for that. And that's very different than what we're dealing with historically.
Yeah, so there's a lot of agency. That's a good point in terms of what you mentioned, people having control over where do we want to live and how they want to live. And that's the essential. I really respect what you and Loki are doing with regard to enabling some of that. And then just tying back to the nomad, I actually agree with you. The opposition was more to the historical example, but I agree with you, your point that this is actually not the same as the Asians in the past. Where in the past, one could argue that a lot of the conflicts with nomads happened because of necessity. It's not that they wanted to plunder, but because they had no choice but to plunder the cities, the cemetery cities. And in history, a lot of the conflicts between nomadic federations and sedentary cities happened at times of climate change. So those were the times of mini ice ages. We look at, for example, the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD, right? It corresponded to a period of climate change and catastrophic coldness in the north. So it forced a lot of the nomadic tribes to huddle and break the boundaries of the Roman Empire. You've got the barbarian invasion, what they call the barbarian invasion at the time, right? All these Avars, all these Goths, all these Slavs, all these, you name it, all these, even the Magyars from a little bit after, but Magyars weren't there at the time. But you got all these peoples coming in from the steppe, the Russia steppe, all the way westwards and southwards. And you can argue that with in various periods of history, it's a repetitive pattern where climate change, mini ice age, gets very cold in the steppe. The steppe peoples have no more choice because they've got no more sheep. They've got no more grasslands. There's no more grassland to feed the cattle that feeds the tribes. And the only thing they can do as a result is to go south, invade, and take over the cities and fight and plunder, unfortunately, because it's survival.
A couple things. I'm realizing that as we're talking about it, we compare the ancient and the present, and then even the sedentary and the nomadic, is that it seems like the big issue here is the land. And that even with network states, if you can get the community going, you get the communication and the capital going, you're still going to have to find a place to settle down and a place to actually build up physically. And then that's when you really start running into all of the different regulatory issues, the issues with migration and protecting your boundaries. If you've set up a really good community online and you've got a lifestyle that you want to protect, then you really want to make sure that the boundaries are not porous. You don't want other people's desire to move around to impinge or to invade upon the lifestyle that you've worked so hard to create with your community. And even with stuff like seasteading, for example, where you're basically forced out into the sea because you can't find a plot of land where the laws allow you to build without any concern of the land being taken over by a bigger government in the vicinity, or just making sure that you're able to keep what you've built the way that you want it to stay, as opposed to having it change as a result of other people migrating into your space. So it definitely seems like one consistent issue here, especially during the ancient times where travel was way more difficult, is the land. And even if you're nomadic and you are dependent upon seasonal changes, then you still don't really have that much agency because you're required to move as soon as the seasons change and then come into conflict with some other society as a result. So it definitely seems like in order for us to really enjoy the lifestyles that we want, our agency is going to be constrained by our ability to choose the land that we want to live in and be able to protect that.
Yeah, on the topic of protection, you make a good point, Jay. On the topic of protection, what the ancients did, for example, in the Roman times and also with the Islamic empires, even the Eastern empires for example, in China as well, was that the sedentary civilizations, when they saw the nomads coming, one strategy to protect their land was essentially to basically carve the nomads against the nomads. So what they did was that they gifted land to certain nomads who surrendered or who pledged loyalty to, for example, the Emperor of Rome. So Emperor Rome would give land to the certain northern nomadic tribes and then organize armies around these nomadic tribes that were not loyal to the emperor to fight other nomadic tribes who were coming in. So it was the sedentary populations were able to divide the nomadic populations to be able to control them and therefore use that as a mechanism to protect their land as well, by as almost like gifting land to protect more land.
I see that Chance and Joshua raised their hands in regards to some points that were mentioned in the past couple of minutes. Chance, you want to go first?
Sure. Just to go off what Jay was saying there, I think an interesting aspect that isn't as talked about, I think, in network state space is just generally, let's say you get the cloud community, what the cloud community actually brings to the table for jurisdictions they go into, and how can they add benefit. And as for the protection stuff, it's interesting. You can look at different examples. Like, for example, I was once in Morocco and going to these cities, they had this area, each major city had a neighborhood called the Salt, something like, I forget the term, but in Arabic, it was basically like the Salt area. And what the Salt area was the Jewish area. And it was almost always right next to the palaces, because at that time period, the Jewish would deal in salt and gold storage. And salt at that time, before refrigeration, was like one of the most important resources in any society because it preserved food. And so they were very useful at that particular thing. And even though the obvious sort of religious challenges there and animosities there, they were protected by the sultans because they were so useful. I think there's many cases that in migration historically, like you could give an example. I was reading a book on the history of Thailand once, and it talked a lot about how the Chinese merchants were just super useful there. They were the merchant people that kind of helped that economy. My favorite example, which I won't go deep down into, but I recommend everyone look into, is the Mennonite migration in the 19th century and 20th centuries. Mennonites are like, I think, the closest example to a, I wouldn't say best case, but like a good case for network states. And in that they would go essentially as a transnational group and they would move like 8K strong and they would negotiate with jurisdictions saying, we will come, here's what we stand for, here's who we are, here's what we bring to the table, here's what we demand. And at that time, they were bringing a skill. Most societies, when they were going, were agricultural societies, and they were some of the best farmers in the world. And so they could go anywhere, and they were just amazing farmers. You say, I'm from Canada. They would go to Canada in very rough spaces, and they could just make land that was non-economical, economically productive, and not cause problems for the nation state. It was like a very good situation, not without its own problems for sure, but I think it's an interesting example for this case. But yeah, the takeaway there is, what if you can get a cloud community that can move to a jurisdiction for a period of time, which is very difficult, what do they bring to the table and for that jurisdiction?
Yeah. Thanks, Chance. Joshua, you want to say something?
Yeah, so far, after about 4 years of following and engaged pretty deeply with network state, I think probably the best way to never get land is to form a DAO and try to raise money and get one.
Like City DAO?
Lots of DAOs trying to do things with land and nothing ever happening. And that's not to say DAO is not a good thing, but I like to stir the pot a bit there. But the point being, land is the big question. And like Jay's talking about, like land is where it's at. Obviously, it's been where it's at through all of history. And we have such a different scenario with land now. You don't get to just show up in a place and pitch your tent and say that I'm going to hang out here and protect it. So even talking about security or protection, I have background in a lot of defense, tactical, other law enforcement things, like defending land, and people talking about PMCs that's all kind of LARPing for the most part in my book. But what has to happen is, how do we negotiate land now? So we're much more, like Chen's saying, you have to have some value that you can bring to a place. And I have some exception with the premise of land last but not never, because it leaves it as an end note. And actually, even if you can get 50,000 people, 1 million people into a digital group, I don't know how that's going to translate into land acquisitions and land management and these other parts. So I appreciate that most people are focusing on the digital communities, because the hard part is actually the land acquisition, management, operations, city development, systems, all the things that are super hard. And I talk with a lot of founders that say, we'll figure that out. Right now, we just got to work on the digital community. I'm like, all right, go ahead. We're over here. I'm over here working on this thing. So it's not that everybody needs to focus on land, but for those who are thinking about the philosophical elements of how we have people in places, that land is a major thing that needs to be sorted out and needs to be focused on, I think, early on.
Nice.
Ryan, I think you had your hand up, and Josh, I got so many questions, but Ryan had his hand up.
Yeah. So I'm coming here from more of a governance angle. In network school itself, like we have two programs. Like one is like you can just live here for 1 month and then go somewhere else or go back to your home. So it is like more of a nomadic program. And then there is a long-term program. So if you are living someplace long term, you are not a nomad. And certainly you will have a better, like a more say in governance. So that's like a conflict of interest. If you are a nomadic person who doesn't have who hasn't pledged any loyalty to a community, so I think it is like you can't have a say in governance of that community. So yeah, I see like that's the biggest conflict of interest for the nomadic lifestyle.
Nice. Yeah, so I think we could all agree that there's so many things to talk about. This is part of the reasons why we want to meet up and of course discuss this, not only from a philosophical but also on a practical level. It starts from the philosophy in a way, right? First you think, and then it comes out into a manifestation, into action. One thing before we go into the next session, I think there would be a really cool thing that Thucydides brings about. Just something I'd like to mention as part of this is that in a lot of ways, we see that the influence of technology that it has on cause and effect has completely accelerated over times of history, right? You had Egypt as one of the greatest civilization that lasted for 4,000 years, right? That's a long time. Right now, we're talking about America basically like breaking down. Biology is giving all this proof, all this data about like how it's like essentially going down. You have what we're seeing here with technology is that the relationship between cause and effect is really accelerated, right? So when you created a company back then, and you really essentially you were going for an empire that would like lasted for generations. You give it to inheritance for your children and the children's children and stuff like that. And so what we see with the internet, especially with the internet, is that people are able to come up with companies and make tons of values in years, now even months, with AI, things like Lovable and Shopify and all these different companies. We're going to see this with network states, right? So the ability to go ahead and actually create and then get a network state being destroyed or being replaced or then starting again, a new version, right? This is something that technology is definitely having an influence on. So it's just like a food for thought on my side, the ability to go ahead and do that. Anyway, so that's just what I wanted to mention. So I think for the next part, so there's a small thing that actually Thucydides brings about that I think it would be interesting, and that's regarding identity, right? And collective action. This continues, and we're almost done with our session. We want to go ahead and progress. So this is the second part of the text. There's also another circumstance that contributes not a little to my conviction of the weakness of ancient times. Okay, He's also criticizing a root problem here. Before the Trojan War, there's no indication of any common action in Hellas, nor indeed of the universal prevalence of the name. On the contrary, before the time of Hellen, son of Deucalion, no such appellation existed, but the country went by the names of different tribes, in particular of the Pelasgian. It was not till Hellen and his sons grew strong in Phthiotis and were invited as allies into other cities that one by one they gradually acquired from the connection the name of Hellenes, though a long time elapsed before the name could fasten itself upon all. The best proof of this is furnished by Homer. Born long after the Trojan War, he nowhere calls all of them by that name, nor indeed any of them except the followers of Achilles from Phthiotis, who were the original Hellenes. In his poems, they are called the Danaans, Argives, and Achaeans. He does not even use the term barbarian, probably because the Hellenes had not yet been marked off from the rest of the world by one distinctive appellation. It appears, therefore, that the several Hellenic communities, comprising not only of those first acquired by name, city by city, as they came to understand each other, but also those assumed it afterwards as the name of the whole people, were before the Trojan War prevented by their want of strength and the absence of mutual intercourse from displaying any collective action. So I thought this was and this is again all in the first chapter of the history of the Peloponnesian War, right? So here, Thucydides is clearly criticizing the weakness of certain societies or civilizations when there's not a common identity, right? And and if there's no common identity, no common name, how are you able to have collective action, right? And in a powerful and respectable way. So this was the excerpt. And for the next couple minutes, here we have 15 minutes left. I'd like to talk about this because Balaji actually says one of the first steps that a network state founder has to do is obviously they need to have this founding vision and everything, but they need to be able to organize for collective action. And Thucydides clearly says you can't have collective action if you don't have a collective name. I'd like to start off this discussion. Maybe you agree with Thucydides, maybe you disagree with Thucydides. Let's go ahead and open the table for this.
Agreed.
Hey, Dolores.
Hi,
Anyone want
Hugh.
anyone? Yes. Anyone?
Thank you for having me. I wanted to go back a bit to what James said a couple minutes before. I introduced myself. I live in Patagonia. We have lots of land in here. Is perhaps I don't know the rest of the world, but I'm guessing there's plenty of land all across the world. And I wanted to connect this with technology that perhaps the land that a couple of years ago was not useful because it has no electricity or no gas, or it was incommunicated today, is all those problems are solved. And it's a very good turning point for societies to begin thinking as to build cities in the middle of what used to be nothing. We have like whole states that are like green, as to say it. So it's perhaps I don't know how many of Patagonia. It's a very big piece of land, and there's a lot of land available, as to say it in any way. And coming back to the thing of the what we read right now about the culture, that makes up a city. All of our cities have multiple different people, and it has no. One of the main problems here, I'm a lawyer, in making agreeing on a common law or normatives for each city is the different points of view of all the people that come to the cities. Perhaps some people come over here looking for a green life and raising the children and having peace, and other people come trying to build a city and make housing for the people that's coming. So all of this added to ancient communities, which are the Mapuches, that are making their own claims about the land. So it's a mixture of different points of view that's very hard sometimes or we struggle a lot to find a common path between us all, right? That's all I wanted to say.
Sure. Thank you, Dolores.
Josh, I think I had a point.
Yeah, I like raising my hand. Usually I'm the old guy doing this in all my groups, but I like the hand raising. It's like passing the shell. Yeah, just Dolores, I think, laid out two of the most important points, which is one thing is the land and resource scarcity is not what it was. So we can start to think very differently about what land really is even used for. And the other thing, of course, is, and this kind of ties in with the communication here, the communication cooperation problem is that, of course, communication was limited by distance in that time. And now we're able to communicate not just over great distance to form digital communities, but we can also really understand that the same land or the same place can have many layers of social structures. And we can have communication happening where you have people with distinctly different ideologies, assuming that they can actually they can live together. But as long as ideologies are focused on being able to coexist in a place, then you can have these different layers of network communities within a same place. So it doesn't have to be that this place is only for this community. That's one thing that we can decouple, is say that this place actually supports numerous communities that are all integrated in different ways. Just SaaS and all sorts of other software is integrated and configured based on what the people are actually using it for. You can have these different layers in a single place as well. It doesn't have to be homogenized.
Yep. The one way to answer the question, one way that there was a network effect of identity in the past was arguably through religion. And going back to the Göktürk example, it's just a fascinating example. So when the Turks spread through Central Asia and Asia Minor, right, they were originally the followers of the Tengri, right, the great wolf, the natural nature priests and priestesses. And then when they were in contact with the Islamic civilization past Central Asia, in Persia, in the Middle East, many of the Göktürks eventually converted to Islam, and they adopted a new network effect of identity that allowed them to, in a way, congeal and allowed them to be integrated with the Century populations as well. And so just one last point, Bitcoin is arguably a modern religion, right? With the Ryan, you're smiling. When Balaji talks a lot about the network effects of Bitcoin, of crypto, and it's like a religion of the new 21st century digital nomads and internet natives around the world. And Jay, I think you had a point you want to make.
Yeah, a bunch of points, a lot of good points made. I have some responses to it. So on what you were just saying about religion, Balaji says that you're supposed to have a highly aligned online community with the capacity for collective action. So that capacity for collective action is actually dependent upon the degree of alignment of the community. And religion is a means of aligning a community. And in particular, he states or suggests having a one commandment as opposed to having a whole bunch of one. You could just focus on at least there being one unifying theme or principle that serves as the basis for the rest of the culture that you craft, which I think is a good idea. Like for Nukanga, it's gamify everything. And once you set a one commandment, it's going to be polarizing because you're necessarily focusing on one precise idea. So it makes it easier for there to be alignment because not everybody is going to naturally align with that one precise idea. And then this is going back to what we were discussing before, but I wanted to mention that I had learned about Balaji and the network state through the Charter Cities Institute. And they have a whole bunch of examples of these charter cities being built up. And one thing that I noticed is that they don't seem to have that much difficulty acquiring land because they partner with jurisdictions, and they're able to partner with jurisdictions because they have a clear identity, and their identity is usually like practical. They're providing jobs, or there's no homes in the area, or there's little agriculture. So like small farm cities, for example, it's the whole theme of it. Their one commandment is we're going to provide agriculture. We're going to integrate with the land. And that's the thing that defines us, is agriculture. And as a result, then the surrounding jurisdictions are cool with that and willing to invest as well, because they're providing almost like a society as a service for their region, for that area around them. So I think there are a lot of good examples that come out of Charter Cities Institute of putting all of these ideas together in a way that works, where you end up with a real like startup society that provides a service and gets supported by others because it's very practical. And as a result, you can more effectively and easily get land and also have a pretty clear identity in what it is that makes your community different from others and integrated.
Nice. Anyone else want to share maybe on identity formation, collective action, network states, Thucydides?
Chance, I think you had some articles and books you were sharing.
I just shared an article from, this is a really good blog. He hasn't written for a long time. It's called Startup Cities from Zach, Jim knows Zach. But he has a thought experiment of a city, of a platform versus a product city. And I think what he means by product is like this one commandment. So he does an example of a fitness city. What would a fitness city look like? People who want to go fitness, they just go there. Yeah. One thing I'd like to do before we go is show you my coin, since we're talking about this is
Nice.
What is that? What is it, Chance?
this is a coin from ancient Athens. It's about
No way.
BC.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's the symbol? What's the emblem on it? It's
This one is the god of wisdom. And then the other one's the owl, which is wisdom. She's also
nice.
god as well. So it's a mixed message there.
It's so cool. Where'd you get it?
There's coin shops. I buy them from a thing called VS Coins.
Nice.
I actually lost one of these once at the first Network State conference, unfortunately. They're a very expensive thing to lose, so I don't recommend it. Yeah.
Great coin.
Looking good.
One little short comment on identity, I think, is just to
Sure.
we're comparing identity was obviously very rooted in the place, right? So they were all identifying with I am now here, so I am Helena. This is the motif in the US is I am American. I'm not necessarily where I came from or I am part of that, but now I identify as American. So apparently we can identify as whatever we want these days, but there's a certain degree of freedom in that because people need to keep regenerating their identity. And right now in our society, there's so many things that get bombarded on us. A lot of people are trying to figure out, like, what is my identity? And so they try to find identity to latch onto. And the freedom is actually understanding that you can create your identity to be what you want it to be. And when people create their identities in alignment, then you start to form a community, and you can have multiple identities with different communities. So that's some of the kind of crazy fluidity that we're dealing with, which is very different than it was before. Most of you probably relate to the challenge when somebody says, "Where are you from?"
Oh,
That's a story. That's not
such a tough question.
Yeah. So anyway,
Josh,
it's a really good one.
That's awesome, Joshua.
Can I just build on what you just said about identity? It's a really good point. It's a really interesting point. I actually feel sometimes the opposite, and hear me on this, is that in the ancient times, you don't have any like identity papers. You can actually fake identity, call whoever you want quite easily. But the problem with today is that the nation state has a monopoly on everyone's identity, right? In the US, we've got the social security card with the social security number, right? You cannot open a bank. You cannot start school. You cannot be employed. You cannot get married, a marriage license whatsoever, like without a social security card, which is tied to your nation state identity, or without a national ID, like in countries like Korea, Japan, China, places like regions like Hong Kong, etc., even in Malaysia, in a lot of these places, it's a national ID, right? Your national ID is tied to almost every single civic financial function. You can't open a bank account without your national ID or social security number. And that creates like a lock-in, unfortunately. And it's like a conflict between if in the future between the nation state system and the network state system. Nation state system arguably has a monopoly on our identities. How do we break away from that in a way that's practical? We can say all we want about wanting to be parts of nations of network states, and that's all great. But at the end of the day, that nation state identity, that social security card, that national ID, that driver's license, that's issued by a nation state or an affiliate of a nation state is essentially needed, at least right now, to put food on the table, to be born, to go to school, to get a job, to get married, to have kids, and even to be recognized as dead. That nation state identity is basically it forms the beginning and end of that identity stack, unfortunately. Hopefully that changes in the future, because the nation state passport, I think Plumia you guys had this article, I think Lauren wrote that, about how the nation state passport is only a invention for the past 150 years or so. So you're right. I think Menachem also made a point that it can change very fast. The modern times can change very fast, exponentially. Maybe we find a solution to the identity stack that allows us to be liberated from the monopoly of nation state identity stack.
It's so interesting
there yet. So go ahead.
Just both you and Josh, Jim. So you guys are mentioning like there's both extremes, and especially the nation state. I like what you said about the nation state. The nation state has given such a homogenized form of identity that everyone is the same, that maybe Josh is, in the sense that because of that, because it's so homogenized, what you said, there needs to be an exaggerated amount of new identities being formed, maybe on a daily basis. And actually, this is something that we could talk about, that we should talk about, because should a nation state have the monopoly on identity or not, right? Should it have that freedom of expression or not? But it's definitely like an interesting parallel between both of your comments. So definitely awesome. Just for the sake of time, because I see we're about a couple minutes over time, just a finishing remark. I just thought it was amazing that Thucydides, which was written like 2,500 years ago, has principles that are still applicable to today, specifically with network states, with biology, what he was talking about. There's a historical precedent about how to do things properly. I thought that was really amazing. So I just want to thank you guys for joining us in this salon. We're 3 minutes above time. Just as a call to action, or maybe some more information regarding what we're doing. So maybe I could go ahead and show you a little bit about my journey. And if you guys are interested, of course, you're more than welcome. What I was showing you with the Organon and Aristotle, this is essentially the first part, which is the craft of logic. So actually, Maimonides, which is one of the greatest philosophers and rabbis of the medieval period, he was with Avicenna and other great Islamic philosophers back then. He said something very interesting, and I thought that it was a good way for us to pursue as a path. And he says, accordingly, it is certainly necessary for whoever wishes to achieve human perfection to train himself at first in the art of logic, then in the mathematical sciences, according to the proper order, then in the natural sciences, and after that in the divine science, or also known as the metaphysics. Maimonides was known to be a big Aristotelian thinker as well, of course, converging a lot of these ideas. And so what I've done is, in a nice notion, of course, to keep track of the progress and everything. So the prerequisite, the art of logic, the craft of logic, is not something in itself. It's not the knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's a prerequisite so that when you do engage in the sciences, when you do engage in mathematics, when you do engage in any kind of philosophy, whatever it may be, you have the proper tools. Right? And so this is really what the whole Organon is about, and why Aristotle, even Immanuel Kant, one of the greatest philosophers, modern philosophers in Germany at the time, in his own respect, forget about if you believe or not believe, he said that Aristotle essentially wrote everything that is needed to know about logic. Right? And so here I just organize everything in their proper order. Of course, since you guys are Edeneum members, free subscribers, you guys can participate with me. I'm doing this learning by myself. If you guys are interested, you're more than welcome. But of course, I also put other things that are relevant in terms of the Maimonidean model, Aristotelian model, in terms of human perfection. Because we're in network states, the second part, and this is a bit about the practical side of things, is about governance. Right? When we think of governance today, we only think at the state level. Okay, there's the prime minister, there's a president, there's this, there's that, whatever it is, right? But there's a different, more atomized model of governance that is super important, and that's governance of yourself. The first order of politics, the first order of governance is with yourself, always with yourself, right? So let's say Balaji gives this example about the chocolate, right? You want to not want to have that chocolate, right? So you always have this internal war. And how do you have that governance within yourself? You are the first city that you should conquer in a certain way. So there's the governance of the soul, governance of the household, governance of the state, and governance of the great nation. Anyway, so this is like a nice way to go ahead and really keep track of a specific path. And yeah, you guys are more than welcome to join me in learning this. As I mentioned, like the specific craft of logic, this is the organon. This is here if you guys are interested. So just an example of the categories, right? This is like a pretty advanced work on logic, just about really everything that you need to know. So I'm personally learning it. I'm creating charts, I'm creating images. I'm really engaging with Aristotle to make sure that we're really learning it, right? Because logic could be a little bit complicated and very terse. So this is like a resource that you guys are definitely interested, if you guys are interested in having. That's just like a little bit of a call to action. I'll be sharing. Oh, Jim, maybe you want to share the screen for the POAP.
Yeah, just 1 minute. And can we just a shout out to Salman again for creating the wonderful POAP. Salman, are you there? Yeah, thank you for the POAP. So he's kindly created for the session a POAP. Salman does a lot of this POAPs for network school communities. Thank you so much. Everyone, just take a minute to scan using your phones the QR code. It's a dynamic link QR code it's different for each individual. And after scanning, you'll be able to mint this awesome image POAP that forever mints your participation in Edeneum 003 session.
Amazing. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, as you leave that for the next minute or so, Jim, we'll be summarizing everything in a nice email newsletter. So we'll have the recording, we'll have the presentation, other resources for you guys to go ahead and access. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much for participating. And again, a shout out to Salman for the amazing POAP. Thank you so much.
Great session, guys. Thanks so much.
Hope to see you guys soon.
And thank you, Professor Menachem.
Awesome. Good to meet you all. Great discussion.
It was really nice to meet you guys.
Really good discussion.
Yeah.
And Josh, your point about the land just really got me thinking. If you want to have a follow-up just discussion on that, I have some questions, ideas. It's a really crucial, central question. And you make a good point that a lot of projects are very digital. Ultimately, the physical land is still super important. And there are ways to get it, but it's also not that hard, not that easy oftentimes.
I think it's important to look at that the same way we look at all the network states, where it's not about the states, it's about the integration of the states and the integration of the land. Yes.
Yeah.
You can go all day, brother.
Yeah, we'll go all day on that one.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. See you, Joshua.
Thank you so much. Everyone scan the POAP?
It's giving me an error message.
May I just share the screen on this? I think
Yes, please.
I'm not sure why it's not loaded, but let me just quickly share the screen and you'll be able to scan it. Yes.
All right, let's see here.
Yeah, it's minting now. In case you're here and you didn't get it, Salman needs a job on Discord. Just DM me. I'm gonna send it to you. Yeah, but I think you can get it now.
Cool. Thanks, Salman.
Sweet. Awesome.
All right, good to meet you.
Thank you guys so much.
Good to meet you as well, Jay.
Jim and Minek.
All the best with your network state. Looking forward to it.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Jim. Thanks for organizing this, Menachem.
For sure. Nice to meet you guys.
And Mati, where are you dialing from? I think you haven't made an introduction. Just curious. Oh no, he left. Never mind. Okay. All right. And thank you again, Salman. Really appreciate the NFT.
Thank you for the call.
Really
Yes,
awesome.
awesome.
All the best.
Yeah.
All the best. Yeah. Alrighty.